one of the things that they drill into when you're in culinary school. Is you taste everyone else's dish, so you know what's right and what's wrong. You want some? Are you sure? So I'm going to plate this, and then this is where chefs earn their money, making things look nice. This
okay, maybe yes.
So this is a Chinese dish, right? It's egg noodles, or sorry, it's rice noodles just like stir fried with a bunch of root
When am I going to put the spam in?
That's the secret ingredient at the end. You know, the secret ingredient. So you just garnish on top, right? This is where you add your color. Put lemon wedges around the side. Right? You put the eggs on the side as well. And because we're classy, we're going to include the smoked mussels. So. You don't want them? We'll keep them on the side. If you want smoked mussels, they're on the front. And as Professor Kundera was saying, you can't talk about the US and the Philippines without talking about Spam. So Spam comes over from the Americans as well. It's a way of showing that you could afford to eat processed meat that's coming over from the Middle East. But it's also something that, you know, it's denigrated. But somewhat biographical. When I moved out to the East Coast, my mom and dad, we drove for 5 days and stopped in Minnesota so we could go to the Spam Museum. So I'll just do like a quick dice demonstration. It's another cooking or another knife skill that is used a lot.
Big in Hawaii also, Spam.
Oh yeah, Spam musubis and yeah. So it's that sound. Yeah, it's that sound. So I'm just gonna cut these down like 1/4 inch, and then I'm just gonna dice them. So whenever you're cutting something like onions or something that you're making into cubes, always go lengthwise then widthwise because it minimizes the number of cuts you have to make. So. There's that, then that. This will saute in about 2 minutes. Yeah, this is your pancit with like a little bit of, with hints of just how colonialism works. You know, you've got a Spanish base, you've got dishes and ingredients that show wealth, you've got American Spam, you've got smoked mussels. All of that comes together in a dish that's very popular in the Philippines, modified everywhere you go. And you ready to eat this?
Yes.
Well, I want your Spam to brown first because it tastes better. So are there any questions? That's the end. So. What's up, Sima? That's a very, very good question. And it's a question that takes a little bit of unpacking because the labor division that's going on with American introductions are basically agriculture for men and domestic science for women. But obviously that's not going to be able to sustain the entire labor force. So there becomes
a secondary labor force for craft goods and making like baskets and weavery and textiles. And those are also exported for very high prices. For men, there's also trade schools, so manufacturing furniture and manufacturing woods, and in addition to export of coconut oil and sugar, the largest exports that are going on are raw materials like wood. In terms of like whether or not women are entering the workforce in the Philippines or contributing outside of the home, no. I mean, that's the blunt answer. In academia, the first female PhD to come out of the University of the Philippines doesn't happen until 1933. Law is still like the lawyers are still predominantly men. Most politicians are still men.
Well, I was talking mostly about agriculture.
Right. Oh, sorry. Okay. No, it's still mostly men that are farming the fields as well. Women, however, are reserved for selling things at markets. Like whenever things were being sold to villages, or even when they were negotiating with prices for export, that was usually reserved for the women in the household.
Also, the advertisements that you show in notions of beauty were very much racial, of course, about the fair skin.
Right.
And that seems to me that it was also very gendered, right? Both women, even the first one that you showed and said she looks like a kind of average Filipino woman,
Right.
which seemed to me that she also looked very much white.
Yeah, she's a white Filipino woman.
Right.
No, she's a light-skinned Filipino woman. Yeah.
So, were these advertisements also trying to kind of create a particular form of function of beauty for women the same way that they did in terms of health for men? Because part of the talk was about health and beauty, but
Right.
it seems that beauty is also very gender neutral. So, if you can, were there any advertisements that kind of talked about health in terms of men's health?
Right.
And had different kind of articulations in terms of that health?
Not as many as women. And the big thing for both genders is there's no representation of dark-skinned Filipinos. Like they will talk about like a Filipino society and include representations of Chinese, of Europeans, Spanish, and like Chinese Filipinos and light-skinned Filipinos, but you're never gonna see the grito, is what we call in Tagalog, or like kaimangi, like a dark-skinned, Filipino. You're not gonna see that. For men, the only thing that's ever discussed in terms of the importance of men, advertisements that talk about Filipino youth never talk about Filipino Filipino girls. They always talk about Filipino boys as being the future of the nation. Like the future of the nation relies on making sure that your boy will be able to pay attention in class, thus give him a bunch of milk so that he'll stay awake because he'll have the proper nutrition. But they're never going to talk about like make sure that your Filipina is eating the same way. Dulce.
Yeah. Just to go back to the idea of agricultural work and how Filipino women participated in that kind of work. I don't know what it is, what the terms are of the work in the colonial period or the period just before the American occupation. But I do know that peasant women would contest or challenge the notion of agricultural work as only work being done by men, because they participate. While plowing is associated with men's work, there are other parts of agricultural tasks
Right.
that are done by women, like
Right.
preparing the land,
Right.
or I don't know the term in English, but it's the seed
Right.
being
Right.
is prepared by the women
Right.
and the children. So
Right.
maybe we'll find out more.
That's a really good point. And I mean, the flip side to the point on that is during the American period, the cultivation of rice actually becomes a low priority. Like they are not promoting planting rice in the Philippines. If anything, they want importation of rice from Southeast Asia so that the Philippines could be used for growing new things that are Western. There's a huge drive to plant corn, huge drive to plant wheat, huge drive to raise more sugar. Basically, they don't want rice. Rice is something that isn't going to make any money. So even though there's a long historical and cultural significance for women in planting rice in the Philippines, it's not going to matter when it's being used as a colony for production. Yeah.
Thank you for this. I appreciated the maps that you showed and the sort of the arrows that were up on the screen. You could tell which ways the cultural exchanges were going during the colonial period. What would you say about those flows today? Are we still seeing some of the same patterns influence the kind of cuisine that you're making right now, or have the patterns shifted in some demonstrable way? Were the patterns then just sort of more formative, and though even though they shifted, there wasn't a great influence on contemporary cuisine? What does that picture look like now?
I think that's a great question, and it's one of the questions that you're gonna, like, if you find Filipino chefs that are very wedded to the idea of Filipino cuisine being something that they know prior to a certain time, they're gonna ignore the fact that the global south is influencing the Filipino cuisine much, much more strongly now. And I'm speaking specifically to overseas foreign workers that are leaving to go and work in Dubai and to work in Canada and the United States and in Europe, and are remitting a whole bunch of money, but then come back to the Philippines after they've made their money, and they bring those culinary influences back with them. You can't go anywhere in Manila now without finding a shawarma stand, and that's only in like the last 10, 15 years. Now it's becoming more and more prevalent to find Korean food in the Philippines, and that's because there's beneficial terms for doing business for Koreans coming into the Philippines. The Spanish legacy is basically something that's held on to by old Spanish Filipino families to prove that they were old Spanish Filipino families. So I was there during the 2010 World Cup, and I always thought it was really weird that so many people were so wedded for Spain to win the World Cup in the Philippines. And when I would ask people why, they're like, oh, because we're Spanish. You're like, no, it's more New World galleon trade than Spanish. But it's a marker of class. You know, having a certain last name that's the Spanish side is going to get you connections.
And is that related to an anti-American feeling? Is that a way of kind of trying to sort of cover over or deny that period of U.S. influence?
That's part of it. That's definitely part of it. It's more of a Phil Lam thing to blame the Spanish than for the Filipinos to blame the Spanish. And I think it's just because like